When someone in real life asks me what my YouTube channel is about, I usually just say it's weird internet stories. But that can mean a lot of different things, only connected by a very loose thread. Like, what does a guy getting candle wax stuck in his urethra have to do with a white lady waking up Chinese? Or a beloved fitness guru being doxxed and outed as gay? Weird internet story can encompass a lot of different things, so for today's video, let's take a look at some of my favorite stories that haven't found their way into a compilation yet. This video is sponsored by Lilo. I know a lot of you guys watching are jacked, muscle-bound genetic freaks, but no matter how hard you go at the gym, I'm sure there's something that you might be ignoring. Something that will help your performance not just in the gym, but in the bedroom. I'm talking about the pelvic floor. The pelvic floor muscles are key to core strength, bladder control, and endurance. And if yours are weak, you can have issues like premature ejaculation, incontinence, and reduced performance. On the flip side, strengthening these muscles not only improve your performance, but also improve prostate health by promoting better circulation and reducing the risk of complications. This isn't just some fringe thing for message board weirdos either. Top athletes and wellness experts incorporate pelvic floor training into their routines. And to help you with that, we got the Lilo F2S Stamina Trainer. The Lilo F2S Stamina Trainer is a high-tech male stamina training device that strengthens the pelvic floor with guided exercises through the Lilo app. Train your stamina with 9 different intensity settings. The Lilo app will keep track of your progress and give you achievements to help you keep on track. The app also has Kegel workouts to further contribute to the strengthening of your pelvic floor. If you're ready to start your pelvic fitness journey today, just click the link in the description right now. You ever look at an ostrich? Like, really look at an ostrich? It's just one of the weirdest looking animals ever. They're all grown but with a baby bird looking fuzzy head. Stay like that their whole lives. All giving you that deep inquisitive stare like they're deeply analyzing you. But you can still tell there's just not much going on. A literal bird brain, with those weirdly muscular legs like when people like to draw Kirby buff. Well, just imagine what it would be for that freakish creature to just diddle you at in public in front of a laughing crowd. That's exactly what happened to one Something Awful user, in a story that's just been burned into my mind for decades. But don't you worry, he gets his comeuppance. For today's video, let's take a look at Something Awful's Tales from the Zoo. Something Awful's been around for a long time. One of the first really popular comedy sites online. I spent so much time in my life back in the day looking at their articles, stuff like Cliff Yablonsky Hates You, where, he makes fun of people's physical appearances, which is what the internet's all about. Just so much content that you'd have to, at this point, to get through all of it, you had to be like one of those ancient monks. But of everything I've ever read on that website, there's one thing that sticks out in my brain so solidly, and I've heard this sentiment echoed by a lot of people. That being the Tales from the Zoo series. That being said though, I don't recall this being a thing that went terribly viral outside of Something Awful, like Super Hornio Brothers or anything like that. So if you weren't actively reading the site at the time, you probably missed it. The first installment of Tales from the Zoo was published on April of 2003, and it's a collection of stories from one forum user, Big Peeler. Ryan Adams, who collected these stories for the Comedy Goldmine section, noted that Something Awful forum users come from a wide variety of backgrounds. And of all of them, Big Peeler's experiences as a zookeeper really stuck out. The first story he tells, Big Peeler gets it in the ass from an ostrich. He begins by talking about the process of picking the yard, which means cleaning up the animal turds. This was one of the main tasks of the zookeepers, and they had to get it done as early as possible. Otherwise, people are going to be coming into the zoo and just staring at a bunch of turds all over the place. For some animals, the zookeepers had to do this while they were separated from the animals, preferably while they were asleep. Because, I'm sure you've seen some pretty graphic videos of tigers at the zoo. But remember, this video is sponsored by Something Awful, not LiveLeak. The ostriches, though, they were generally safe to be around. Generally. He goes on to describe how dumb the ostriches are. As he puts it, look at the size of their heads. It's as big as your fist, and their brains are as big as your left nut. In fact, these animals are so dumb that sometimes they just do Big Peeler's job for him. They are so fucking stupid that they would take a shit and turn around and eat it. We would laugh our asses off watching them do this. Their tail would go up in the air and this huge greenish brown plop would come out, then they'd turn around and look at it, then gobble it down. You would see this softball-sized lump go down their necks and they just walk off. Morons. This guy really hates the ostriches, but I'm sure you'll understand why. Now, the ostriches are a popular attraction at the zoo, not just because they're so weird looking, but also they do this thing. Every 2 minutes or so, they'll bend their neck into like an S shape. They stretch their wings out and just run around in circles. One gets started and they all start going. It's contagious like a classroom of remedial children. In case you're having a hard time picturing what I'm describing here, the San Diego Zoo actually has a video of it. It's entitled Ostriches Stuck on Spin Cycle, and honestly, it's a bit more graceful than I expected, especially considering how weird the ostriches look. But once again, I can see why Big Peeler doesn't see the beauty in the ostrich dance. So when they'd go to pick the ostrich yard, it was a two-man team. On this fateful day, the team was him and his friend Gary. One man would have a shovel and a rake to collect the ostrich leavings, while the other one would man the big plastic garbage can and stand guard, in case the ostriches got a little suspicious, because if you recall, they do enjoy to partake in their own feces. So that garbage can was for them a smorgasbord on wheels, and if they got close enough to partake, it'd be a huge mess. He also noted the risks of an ostrich attack. The only harm an ostrich can really do to you is attack you with their middle toe. They kick forward and can open a person's belly up with one swipe. Hey, it's what they do. But attacks like that are very rare with females, and that's all we had in this yard. So they're out here picking the yard, and they're not particularly concerned with the danger of the ostriches, or for that matter, the grossness of the poop. They're just completely desensitized to it at this point. He even described how sometimes they just grab a turd with their hands and kinda shoot it at the garbage can, just Kobe with the turd. What they're mostly concerned about is the public. They're always trying to hop over the ropes into the yards, or trying to pet the animals or feed them their soda cups or some stupid shit like that. Zookeepers hate the public. Anyhow, at this point, they've gone through the yard and the garbage can's filled up completely. So Gary has to get a new garbage can, leaving Big Peeler alone with the birds and the public. While he's by himself, he notices a few eggs. Remember that this yard is all female, so they're definitely not fertilized. So what they would do is they would just grab the eggs and bring them to the commissary and have themselves a big-ass ostrich omelet. That might sound gross to you, but honestly, I'd try it. Ostrich meat ain't that bad, so why would the eggs be? So he goes to pick up these eggs, and as soon as he does, he senses a presence behind him. And he drew an MS Paint masterpiece depicting this scene. In a second, I see this ostrich out of the corner of my eye. Before I could turn around, she sort of knocked me down on one knee. Why, you motherfucker. And I tried to stand up. Bam! She bumps me again from behind, and this time she knocks me flat on my stomach. I can hear the people standing on the edge of the ostrich yard laughing. Here, I'm getting attacked by this pea-brained bird, and they're laughing their asses off. And then, 400 pounds or so of ostrich climbs on top of him, starts to hump him, thrusting right at his ass. At this point, the crowd are completely losing their minds and cheering on the ostrich to have its way with him. Gary sees what's going on and runs back, yelling and waving his arms in the air. This was not a good idea, as the act of going like this made him look like a bigger threat to the ostrich. So now it's even more aggressively trying to protect her nest. She leaves Big Peeler alone and starts to chase Gary. And as he said before, one of them gets started and they all start going, so now there's 10 ostriches chasing them. In an attempt to confuse the birds, they try to run in an S pattern. The audience is now howling with laughter, and hell, I couldn't blame them. Here we are, running around like Stevie Wonder at a track meet. I've got 5 birds after me, and Gary's got 5 after him. In any case, it kinda is working, and they manage to get halfway across the yard. But then, one of the birds manages to trap Gary against the wall. She's pecking at his head and kicking him, and he's screaming for help. As he said before, it's rare, but these animals can do damage if they want. So Big Peeler, to save his friend, picks up a rake and starts swinging. He hits the bird in its ass, getting its attention. Then he swings it right at her neck. What comes next, you know how I said this story is just completely burned into my memory? It's really what happens next that's just such a clear visual that never leaves me. Accompanied, of course, by another MS Paint masterpiece. The blow had broken the ostrich's neck. Not just like, my neck's broken, like it snapped it like a twig. Just 18 inches of neck dangling with the head still attached. And even in this state, the bird continues to chase Big Peeler. Eventually though, she starts to lose her senses, starts running in all kinds of crazy directions, starts jumping, and then it falls over dead in front of a crowd of screaming adults and crying children. Everyone's screaming and covering their eyes and calling us names. I'm like, hey, we almost got killed here, folks. Fuck those ostriches. They get back to the barn and debrief their boss on what just happened. And at this point, they're sure they're going to lose their jobs. Especially since now they've got a big crowd of people who are angry that they just watched zookeepers kill an ostrich. Luckily for them, there was a guy who saw the whole thing and told the head curator what really happened. That basically they had to defend themselves in a life or death situation, and thus they were able to keep their jobs. Then this happens. We went back out with a wheelbarrow and took the corpse up to the hospital. They did a thorough examination and deemed it disease-free. The following statement is totally true, I swear on my dead mother's eyes. The next week, we ate it. We cooked it like a turkey and ate it. Since it died of natural causes, it was totally safe. We had huge ovens in the commissary since we prepared food for the whole zoo there. We had a huge zoo BQ featuring the ostrich. Drumsticks as big as a watermelon. Totally fucking surreal. Oh, it tastes just like beef. Honestly, very gamey. Now, I know even though he says it's totally true, some people are gonna see that and be like, oh yeah, it's probably made up. But honestly, one thing that really sells this story to me is that he very accurately described the taste of ostrich in 2003. Because at the time, I mean, now you can kind of get ostrich all over the place. Well, you can literally just go on Wild Fork and order yourself a couple ostrich steaks. But at the time, people weren't really eating ostrich like that. Poor Kurt Angle got so much grief for advertising ostrich jerky. But it actually does kind of taste like beef, while having more protein and less fat than chicken. At this point, it probably sounds like I'm being paid off by Big Ostrich, but I'm just stating facts here. You know, I enjoy a nice scented candle sometimes. I got all different kinds. I got chocolatey ones, peppermint. I got this one that kind of smells like a Christmas tree. And there's been a few times when I put out the candle, I'm done with it for the night, I go to move it, and I get a little bit of a candle wax on my finger. And you quickly notice the unusual properties of the melted wax. How quickly it dries and hardens as it cools down, and how it just readily takes on the shape of whatever it's dried on. And it's pretty simple to make your own candles. A lot of people do it for fun or for profit, and get all kinds of fun molds to make different shaped candles. But of course, anything that could be filled with wax could be a mold. I mean, it's basically how a kidney stone works, right? Yeah, you might say that you're basically walking around with a bunch of free candle molds at any given time. This is the story of the guy who put candle wax in his pee hole. On Friday, January 6th of 2017, a now deleted post was made to r/TIFU. TIFU by getting way too curious as a teenager and putting something somewhere I shouldn't have. Which honestly describes a good chunk of posts that are ever made to that subreddit. It's actually why the post was eventually deleted, as they now have a rule against the common types of oopsie daisies. In my opinion though, this one's a little special, and thankfully it was archived on r/undelete. The poster, 30 years old at the time of posting, tells a story from spring break 15 years prior when he was 15 years old. He couldn't go outside anywhere for undisclosed reasons. But I'm just picturing when Bart Simpson broke his leg and suddenly he becomes an Alfred Hitchcock character. Although I guess this poster is not so much Alfred Hitchcock as he is Alfred plays with his cock. And that's exactly what he did all summer. It's just him and his 56K modem on a never-ending goon sesh. He also mentions that he was a bit of a pyromaniac. But he quickly notes that it's not what you might be thinking. We're not getting any kind of reenactment of the end scene of Salo here. He blows out one of his candles, and as I spoke about in the intro, he gets some wax on his hands. And in his bored, cabin fever-addled state, he starts playing with it like Play-Doh. It gets to that point everyone gets to with Play-Doh where you just start rolling it up into a tube. He makes a 2-inch long pencil shape, and then he gets an idea. I wonder what this would feel like in my dick. I don't know what it is that so many dudes just, for some reason, instinctually come to the conclusion that this might feel good. Because to me, that's something you naturally want to avoid because you just assume it's gonna hurt. But I guess him and all the sounding enjoyers out there are just built different. Without hesitation, I dropped my shorts and proceeded with my endeavor to explore the unexplored. About halfway, I was thinking this felt strange, but after the better part of a week of choking the chicken, anything different felt good. So I pushed it in until I could barely see it. I sat there touching myself thinking it wasn't half bad, but then I noticed my little wax probe was slowly disappearing deeper. He tried to squeeze it back out, but it wouldn't come back out. It disappears inside of him completely, and now he begins to panic. I think back to the Bucky Bowl incident I once spoke about on the channel, how the guy eventually reaches for the X-Acto knife. But this guy hadn't gotten that desperate yet. His first idea, he's gonna pee it out. OP runs to the bathroom and pisses with all his might, but nothing. He then does perhaps the most mind-boggling thing in this entire story. He goes to the shower to look for it in his butt. How do you even conceive of that? Like, does he think the human body is hollow like a piggy bank and everything's just kind of rolling around in there? I mean, he was a young guy, but 15's not that young. This is like baby brain stuff. Surely you gotta have more sense than that. Although thinking about it, I did have a friend when I was about that age who thought you can get a girl pregnant from a BJ. So I guess, you know, some people are like that. In any case, you will be shocked to hear that he did in fact not find it in his butt. Then he comes up with one third and final plan. He's gonna jerk it out. he engages in an intense session that he refers to as the Fap and the Furious. He was imagining that there might be a massive explosion of jizz and candle wax that frees him of this prison. Instead, he just got a little trickle. A pathetic tiddlywink, as I once heard this referred to. So he's just sitting and crying in the shower now. He knows he should go to the doctor, but he has to tell his parents why he needs to go to the doctor, which in so many of these stories is the reason that they get way worse than they had to be. So instead, he just goes about his life with a pregnant wiener. Every step felt like he was being stabbed in the crotch, and he constantly felt like he had to pee even if he didn't. But when he went, only a little bit of pink-tinged urine came out. But despite his agony, he couldn't bear to tell his parents to go to the doctor. So I just lived with it every day. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The pain never got better. I just resigned myself to the fact that this was my life now. He claims to have lived like this for 2 years after the incident, until the summer after graduation. He's at a party drunk off his ass. Then he hits the strip club with his friends, which seems a bit odd as he'd be 17 years old here, maybe 18 if his birthday was in a span of a couple months. Perhaps he's in Canada or the UK where this is allowed, or maybe he had a fake ID. In any case, he says he's having a great time and then he goes to the bathroom. He's pissing, but then suddenly the stream comes to a halt and he gets this weird feeling. And then I see it. Amidst the trickle of pink urine, I see this thing peek out the tip. It's the piece of wax I had lost 2 years earlier. I'm so drunk and excited, I don't know what to do. I grab the end of it very carefully and slowly pull it out. I stop for a couple seconds to look at it and ponder my life up to this point. Then I throw it in the toilet, finish my business, and go on my way. He describes the relief he felt. That this constant white noise of pain he'd been experiencing for the past 2 years just vanished in an instant. He felt light, like Goku taking off his weighted clothes. The experience changed his entire personality. For 2 years, this thing had caused me depression, anxiety, and embarrassment. With that thing finally out of me, I became less introverted. I was more open to going out socially. 2 months later, I went off to college and met the woman I would eventually marry. It was a strange and uncomfortable period in my life, but a valuable lesson was learned. Don't put shit where it doesn't belong. If you do, make sure you have some method of retrieval. Now, while TIFU will often give the benefit of the doubt to even the most ridiculous stories, people are not having this one. This one almost unanimously gets called out as bullshit for a wide variety of reasons. For starters, the 2 years thing. You really dealt with constant agonizing pain for 2 years straight. That's one of those things that, no matter how deep your sense of embarrassment, you'll eventually crack. Hardened war criminals will give up their life's work over less torture. And you're just some sheltered 15-year-old who's afraid of his mommy? Like, I don't think so. As one commenter, SinkingFun33, pointed out, the intellectual skill in writing this story and the act described in the story do not correspond at all. Why not see a doctor if you are peeing blood for years? You didn't have to tell your parents what you did. And even if you really are that tough of a 15-year-old to survive 2 years of agony, this would eventually lead to some kind of health problem that wouldn't be possible to cover up. Perhaps an infection of some sort, or renal failure. There is some debate over whether hydronephrosis, the swelling of the kidneys, was possible from a partial obstruction like this. You'll also remember that the matter of him going to a strip club at 17 years old made me raise my eyebrow a bit. A Redditor named Green6 pointed out a detail that I hadn't even considered. Story doesn't add up. Talks like an American. Don't know where in America you can go and get pissed drunk at 17 at a strip club. I hadn't even considered looking at how he talks. And sure enough, you can see that he's spelled endeavor as an American would, with no letter U. It was also argued that even considering the possible health complications, it's unlikely that the wax would stay there in that state for 2 years. Urine is warm and acidic. Within 2 years, it would have slowly came out way before 2 years. I call bullshit. Although another user argued against this point. Body temperature is usually too low to melt wax, and not even concentrated sulfuric acid would do anything to paraffin wax. Alternatively though, it's possible that the thing would actually get bigger, because the wax could gradually accumulate minerals from urine streams. Another user, When the Light Goes, consulted the experts at r/sounding. I find it hard to believe that a piece of candle wax would actually be sucked down into the bladder by some unknown force. As corroborated by the experienced folks at r/sounding, a solid rod would be prevented from going too far down the urethra by the greater than 90-degree bend in the ladder. If a sound does get lost, it can simply be retrieved when the penis becomes flaccid again. In the unlikely event that the candle wax broke up inside the penis, one really could simply push on their perineum, the skin between your willy/vag and your bumhole, on their prostate to remove the object. He also claimed, as many others did, that the story was essentially a ripoff of a story by Chuck Palahniuk, the short story Guts, which appeared in his book Haunted. In Guts, the narrator details a bunch of different ways that people he knew injured themselves trying to get off, not unlike some of the videos I've made. One of these characters, like OP, also winds up with an improvised wax sounding device trapped inside of his wiener, and he's afraid to tell his parents. That being said, aside from that, there are a lot of differences in the stories. For example, the character in Palahniuk's story heard about sounding from his brother who was in the Navy and told him that this is the way that Arabs get off. He also set out with the idea of sounding before he found the wax, considering objects like a ballpoint pen. He also doesn't panic at first after he loses the wax, as he figures it'll just dissolve inside of him no problem. But then the pain hits him later. The story also ends completely differently. This section of Guts concludes, "They paid for the bladder operation with his college fund. One stupid mistake and now he'll never be a lawyer." So although most of the comments in this thread were calling it a ripoff, I honestly think it could go either way. The narrative thrust is the same, and the manner in which the wax is described as being lost is the same, but basically everything else is different. And that being said, viewers of this channel will know that guys are constantly finding ways to harm themselves in the pursuit of pleasure. It's unquestionable that countless people have actually tried this. And I actually have proof of at least one, but we'll get to that later. In the case of Guts in this story specifically, a poster named Lance Cooley made a good point. I thought I remember hearing Palahniuk sat in on sex addict support groups in researching that story, so it's possibly somebody's story, not OP's though. And this is true. He'd actually heard these stories while doing research for his novel Choked and used them in Guts. In any case, OP ignored all the posts mentioning Guts, but there were a few threads in which he tried to defend himself. It's kind of hard to follow now since he's deleted everything and none of these posts were archived, but you can kind of piece some of them together in the replies. The best of these engagements is where he loses track of how old he is. He apparently responded to someone saying that the story could have actually been as recent as 10 years ago, not necessarily 15 years ago. But wait, would that mean that he was actually 20 years old when this happened? Because there's a big difference between this happening to a 15-year-old and this happening to a 20-year-old. And as one commenter, R. Scholes, replied, "So you aren't sure if you're 25 or 30 right now." A number of people also mentioned that they recalled reading this story before. Not the Palahniuk story, and that one has made the rounds before uncredited, but they meant this exact story. And sure enough, it had actually been posted to r/TIFU verbatim the year before. Funny enough though, that time the reaction was completely different. While there were a few very low rated posts that did make the Guts comparison, in this thread the people are mostly sympathetic. "It's an absolute miracle you didn't get an infection. This is one of the many TIFU posts that have made me whisper to myself, what the actual fuck, LMAO. 2 years. TIL, dick wax is a thing." It's funny the difference a year can make. But as unbelievable and as unlikely as this story may seem, I actually did manage to find a case of a man pouring candle wax down his pee hole in a medical journal, published on September 22nd in volume 44 of Urology Case Reports. Endoscopic removal of self-inflicted urethral foreign body, a case report. The focus of the report is a 64-year-old man who turned up with an electrical wire in his urethra. But it also mentions that cases of foreign bodies found in the lower urinary tract have been increasing. Mostly for sex stuff, but also people with psychological issues as well as people who are doing it for self-therapeutic reasons. And it provides a few examples, including a case in which candle wax was found inside the urethra. There's not a ton of details, but it states that they removed it using xylol, which is a paint solvent. Xylol can cause a bit of burning pain, particularly in sensitive areas like the eyes, the mouth, or the pee hole. But I guess that's preferable to having a permanently stuffed up wiener. But anyway, that's all about kids in the sandboxing yourself with candle wax. Back in the day, before every single marginally talented geek decided that they wanted to make a podcast or a YouTube channel, they made a webcomic. This gold rush was probably inspired in 1998 by the runaway success of Penny Arcade. Penny Arcade, as you probably know, is a webcomic about two guys who like to play video games. People saw that and they're like, hey, I play video games too. Let me get rich and famous by drawing big gaping mouths and explainy hands. And thus, the internet became absolutely flooded with webcomics about video games and the people who play them. And that's not to say that they were all doing the same thing. There were a few that tried to distinguish themselves. Take Overclocked, for example, which led to the much more popular OC Remix. Overclocked was a webcomic that focused mainly on the growing emulation scene at the time. And then you had 8-Bit Theater, which took sprites from Final Fantasy games and used them to parody the genre cliches. And then you had VG Cats, which instead of 2 guys, it was 2 cats. I'm not even gonna lie, VG Cats was probably my favorite of all of them. But the truth is that some people didn't really want something different. Some people were so addicted to reading the story of 2 guys sitting on a couch talking about video games that they really just wanted the great value version of Penny Arcade. And in 2002, a comic called Control-Alt-Delete swooped in to give everybody their fix of wide open mouths and explainy hands. Control-Alt-Delete, aka the Kirkland Signature Gaming webcomic, was created by a guy named Tim Buckley. Not the musician Tim Buckley, this Tim Buckley. By many people, this is considered to be the absolute worst gaming webcomic in history. And the thing about it is, it started off very self-aware. Control-Alt-Delete began as a parody of this very saturated genre before it quickly became the very thing it was mocking. Let's take a look at the first Control-Alt-Delete comic. So, is a strip about 2 guys who sit around and play video games? Seems a tad cliched, doesn't it? Nah, it's tried and true. Besides, we have a hook. Oh really? What? We've got a 3rd character. And the 3rd character is a watermelon. Hehe. What? Serious guy is not amused. And now, that joke that you saw there, where the wacky guy does something wacky and random and the serious guy gives him a look, that's basically the main joke that this comic has, and it repeats itself over and over again for 15 or more years, with those same exact facial expressions. That's actually a major point of criticism that a lot of people had for this comic, that they just paste the same facial expressions over and over and over again. Of course, you're watching this on YouTube, where half the channels are presented by characters that only have 3 or 4 facial expressions. So, you know, glass houses and whatnot. And honestly, I think that would be perfectly fine if the writing were stronger, but it wasn't. It was basically that same joke format that I showed you there, or really long rants. Just take a look at all of these words, and don't worry, I'm not gonna read them to you, I just want you to soak them in. Seriously, Control-Alt-Delete is not the X-Men, and Tim Buckley is not Chris Claremont. And we probably should talk a bit more about the comic's creator, Tim Buckley, because really, he's at the very heart of why you're probably here. The Lost meme. So let's get to know Tim Buckley a little bit. Here's what he has to say. My name is Tim Buckley. I'm a 24-year-old gamer. I've played every violent video game in existence. I have never killed anyone. There are millions of gamers just like me, and we're getting sick of people like you blaming your problems on us. Ignorance causes violence, not video games. Man up and take responsibility. We outnumber you and the people that think like you. Don't fuck with us. So Tim Buckley is very clearly a guy who cares a lot about gaming and gamers. And it seemed like he was perfectly content to spend years churning out this comic that was mostly humorous, very rarely serious or had any kind of continuity, and his readers were more than happy to read it. But then all of a sudden, or what seemed to be all of a sudden, Tim got up one day and decided he wanted to be a fucking artiste. It begins with a pregnancy storyline. Ethan, I just got back from the doctor's appointment. I'm pregnant. And he peed himself. And this comic, which was the beginning of a much longer story arc, divided the fan base a bit. Some people were perfectly fine with Tim Buckley stretching his arms out a little bit and trying to take the comic in new creative directions. But a lot of people, probably way more people, were like, what the hell is happening to our gaming comic? They really didn't want this thing they read that was mostly about people talking about video games to suddenly turn into some serious family drama. And over the next few months, references to the impending baby and the wedding were peppered in amongst the usual types of goofy, wacky comics. But that baby was a ticking time bomb, and a lot of the audience was dreading what direction the comic might go in as soon as it was born. Well, boy did they get lucky. Without further ado, I present to you Tim Buckley's most famous creation, Loss. She had a miscarriage. No baby. Problem solved. What? This is probably the most that a vaguely humorous comic strip has ever or ever will completely blindside its audience. There are ways that you can tackle serious issues in comedy, but when you miss, you really miss. Like, everybody remembers that episode of The Fresh Prince where Will gets shot and it's all serious and whatnot, but that didn't totally derail the show. Like, whatever that was, Lost is the opposite of that. And in an attempt to get in front of the obvious controversy that this caused, Tim Buckley published a blog post on the same day. First, he addressed the controversy over deciding to take the comic in a serious direction. I know that everybody has their own idea of what Control-Alt-Delete is supposed to be. Some people feel it's a video game comic and the character stories are just filler or don't belong, and some people think it's a story comic and the one-shots are just filler. Most times it's categorized as a gaming comic, which is fine and understandable. When asked directly though, I describe Control-Alt-Delete as a gamer comic or a comic about gamers. Semantics perhaps, but an important distinction for me. While the strip has always and will always have its foundation firmly rooted in gaming, it's not the only topic I want to tell jokes and stories about. He also stated that he had planned this story arc from the very beginning. As I've said in the past, the grand plan for the comic and its characters has been written for years. I knew that, and how, Ethan was going to propose to Lila when I introduced her into the comic. I knew when he proposed that shortly before the wedding Lila was going to get pregnant and then miscarry, and I had to wait 2 years to write it. I know what happens next, and I know how they handle it. I know what happens either further down the line. I know what Scott is doing in his room. I know who moves out and when. I know who dies and who doesn't die. And I know that, through all of it, Ethan is still Ethan, Lila is still Lila, and Lucas is still Lucas, and they are still gamers. Damn, they should've got Tim Buckley to write for Lost. And then he went on to explain why he did the miscarriage story. Some many years ago, long before I started the comic, I was in a relationship and we suffered a miscarriage. Now, this relationship was toxic to begin with and doomed to fail regardless, so that the miscarriage was the straw that broke the camel's back and is no surprise. Later that week, this portion of Tim's statement would be republished in Cyanide and Happiness' parody of Lost. It should be noted that when I went to the Cyanide and Happiness website and saved this comic, the file name was Tim Actually Said This. And of course, Cyanide and Happiness would not be the only ones to parody this comic. If you're on this channel, you already know. You're a fellow traveler. You know how this story winds up. The Lost comic comes out and it goes on to be one of the internet's longest surviving memes, with parodies that become more and more minimalist and esoteric over the course of years. It's a meme that, for some reason, despite all odds, just refuses to stay dead. You think it's over with and then it just creeps its way back up.
Rise from your grave.
Why?
I don't know!
Can you imagine how it must feel to create a work that is so exceptionally terrible, it does the impossible and spawns a meme that refuses to stay dead? Well, in a 2015 interview with New York Magazine, Tim Buckley addressed this question, and surprisingly he seems to be taking it in stride, albeit with a little bit of resentment towards his audience's lack of a refined palate for his artistry. The piece is entitled, Talking to the Man Behind Lost, the internet's longest running miscarriage joke. You see, joke is in quotation marks, which means it's not really a joke. As for the memes, Buckley's reaction to them has varied over the years from anger because perhaps I had miscalculated my demographic's ability/willingness to approach such a sensitive subject matter, to frustration for CAD being pigeonholed as a wacky gamer comic. And on very rare occasions, as much as I hate to admit it, because I certainly don't want to make light of the subject matter itself, I found them quite amusing. Now he says he's flattered that something he made has been entertaining people for more than 7 years. And honestly, that's probably the best way you could possibly look at it. So there you have it, the story of loss.
What would you do if one day you woke up with man boobs? Insurance doesn't cover the surgery, you can't afford it, and it hurts. Of course, there's only one thing you can do. Cut them off yourself. The internet is littered with stories of people who performed all kinds of surgical procedures on themselves. And it almost always turns out how you'd expect. So for today's video, let's take a look at some people who performed medical procedures on themselves with varying degrees of success. I remember that when I was in high school, eyebrow piercing started to become a big trend. You'd find guides online about how to do it yourself. You just numb the area with some ice, you put a needle through, and you stick in your jewelry. I even had some friends who did that. Of course, you would read these warnings that you could blind yourself by accidentally severing a nerve. I don't know if that was true or not, but it was enough to scare me off until I saved up for real ones. Then I had one pulled out of my face playing football and another kicked out at a Chimera show. But there's a lot of people out there who are clearly a lot more daring than I am, and they performed much more extreme procedures on themselves without hesitation. Let's start with the man boob story that I mentioned in the intro. Gynecomastia is a condition where the breast tissue in a man grows abnormally large, typically as a result of some kind of hormonal imbalance. Usually it just resolves itself on its own, but sometimes it doesn't, and then you need surgical intervention. Such was the case for a Redditor named Absolomon. He spoke about his experience in a thread named TIFU performing self-surgery on my gynecomastia. He went to the doctor's office after discovering a hard, rubbery nodule on his chest. This could actually be a symptom of breast cancer, which men do get. Thankfully, it wasn't cancer, but it was diagnosed as gynecomastia, and it would have to be removed surgically. However, this is a procedure that is generally performed by a plastic surgeon, and it's considered elective, and that would cost thousands of dollars that he didn't have. It's wild how many of the gruesome stories that I cover are caused by failings of the medical system. He noted that despite the insurance company determining that his problem was cosmetic, the gynecomastia actually wasn't visible, but he could feel it. And it was painful. It was a sensation that he could feel all day long, and it was bothering him constantly. And he realized that something had to be done, if just for the sake of his mental health. And without a way for him to save up the surgery money in a reasonable amount of time, he decided he's just gonna do it himself. First, he made the anesthetic. I created an anesthetic using lidocaine 10% based tattoo numbing cream. I dissolved the numbing cream in water, then injected it under my skin several times around my left nipple, till it was completely numb. Noted that he also posted this anesthetic as a life pro tip. Then I took a sterile scalpel and sliced into my breast, directly alongside my nipple, completing a half circle around the nipple through all layers down to the muscle, about an inch of skin fat and whatever. If I had to guess, I'd expect that he hadn't exactly carved the neatest possible half-circle nipple carving. He's giving himself titty surgery like he's Ricky-O tying his tendons together. Probably doesn't have the steadiest hand in that moment. Probably left his nipple looking like Kirk Van Houten's drawing of dignity. And he also says that his scalpel is sterile, but I kind of don't think that the guy who can't afford surgery has money for his own personal autoclave at home. You can get it sterile-ish, but not as much as you would probably like for a surgery. Although, according to another comment he makes, he was preventing infection by taking a round of antibiotics in the days leading up to the surgery. He continues, "Here, I made several mistakes. The first mistake was that he cut into the top side of his nipple so he could see his work, but the nodule was on the lower side. He also just plumb forgot to get a second tool to actually get the nodule out. So he had to improvise and use the back end of the scalpel, and also his fingers to dig it out of himself. Hope he cut his nails." He was only able to partially accomplish the removal and said that most of the nodule remained. At this point, he's also bleeding profusely because, as he put it, he had severed a medium-sized vein and his heart rate was now 130 BPM. He's gushing blood like a kung fu movie, so he's like, you know what? What he does next is so funny to me. After all this, he just goes to the hospital and has them stitch him up. He's like, you know what? I just chopped up my own man boob. Now you guys fix it. Maybe he was hoping that they would just grab the rest of it while they're in there. But I'm guessing he didn't have to pay out of pocket for this because now this is no longer cosmetic. Now he's in the middle of a medical emergency. The next day, the swelling has gone down, and he feels the degree to which the nodule is still mostly there. Although now it's not attached directly to the nipple. TLDR performed self-surgery to remove lump in breast and did not get it all. I love the framing of this, that the mistake isn't that he mangled himself, it's that he didn't get it all. So the commenters are like, dude, what's wrong with you? To which he replies that he's actually done this before. He's removed sebaceous cysts and itchy moles. He taught himself how to do these kinds of surgeries through YouTube videos. Admitting this caused a bunch of commenters to say that perhaps the issue was actually a mental one and you feel compelled to operate on yourself. In any case, he states that once this is healed up, he plans to go back in and get the rest. He also promised pictures and videos of the next attempt, which never came because he just completely abandoned the account a few days later. The next story takes us to Korea in the 80s. The story of a woman named Han Hae-kyung, aka Han Myoku. Han Myoku was born in the early 60s to a very poor family who struggled to make ends meet. And because of this, she became determined to become a rich and famous singer so that she could provide a better life for her parents. Luckily for her, she turned out to be very good looking in her early 20s, as she found success as a model and a club singer, becoming known to some as the Korean Brooke Shields. But she wanted more. The local success was nice, but it wasn't satiating that fire that had been burning in her since she was young. and at that time, there was more opportunity in Japan. So against her parents' wishes, she leaves Korea and goes to Japan in search of bigger things. But the thing about a market that has more opportunity, it also has more competition, and she's not seeing as much success as she had hoped. She starts comparing herself to all these other women who are getting the jobs she wants. She would eventually spend so much time looking in the mirror, examining her face, and finding flaws that were basically imperceptible to anyone else, that her friends called her the Mirror Princess. She felt that she had to do something if she wanted to succeed. Why not get some work done? So at the age of 28, she has her first procedure. I saw some claims that she had work done on her jaw, which she thought was too wide, but most sources seem to point to her getting some fillers injected. And the fillers are what ultimately become her downfall. The first procedure goes really well for her. She's getting compliments and she likes how it looks. But it's still not enough, so she gets another. And then she gets another. It gets to a point where she's not only spending all of her money on surgery, she's also taking out loans to get procedures. And at a certain point, these operations start to get really visible negative side effects, to a point where surgeons are refusing to work on her. And honestly, they probably should have started doing this way before, but you know, people like money. Some surgeons even told her that her problem was mental and not physical. And at some point, she actually did literally start hearing voices in her head telling her to get procedures done. And once she got them done, they would be temporarily silenced. In any case, now in this condition, she's getting no jobs. And now she's broke because she spent all of her money on plastic surgery. So she's forced to return home to her parents, and they don't even recognize her at first. They immediately bring her to a doctor who also determines that this is actually a mental health issue, and she receives medication to treat the mental health issue. But of course, the treatment proves to be too expensive and she's forced to stop it. And when she stops it, the compulsion returns. When she started getting these surgeries, it was to get a competitive edge in the entertainment industry, but now the entertainment industry is the furthest thing from her life. The surgeries have become an end into themselves. And really, this story shows you how addiction isn't necessarily always something that comes from a drug and it can sneak up on you. So now she's searching out procedures in Korea and the doctors are all still refusing her. But eventually, she does manage to find one shady doctor who'll do it. In fact, not only does he perform the procedure, he provides her with a supply of silicone to inject and shows her how to do it herself. Eventually, the supply runs out and she can't afford it anymore. So she starts looking for other stuff she can use. She tries things like moisturizing lotion, cooking oil, and even cement. This, of course, completely deforms her face because these materials are nothing like medical grade silicone. Some of it hardens into lumps, some of it migrates down into her neck. Now the neighborhood children make fun of her and they call her the fan lady because she has a skinny body and a big head that resembles a fan. She doesn't want to be subjected to this ridicule day in and day out, so she becomes a bit of a recluse. She can't get a job, but she's continually clashing with her parents. So she moves out with what little money she has left. And with no one left in her life now to even try to help her, she completely hits rock bottom. But being an extremely conspicuous person, her story starts to spread locally. Then in 2004, a Korean TV show covers her story. The hope was that they could raise money for her surgery and find a doctor who could try and do something. And sure enough, the Korean audience was touched by her story and managed to donate enough for her to get 10 procedures. Throughout these procedures, several pounds of foreign substances were removed from her face. The size of her head was significantly reduced. Now there are some other side effects to the procedures, particularly slurred speech, and she couldn't blink anymore. Although she was left with these side effects and they weren't able to completely restore her looks to normal, she did become more comfortable being able to go out into the world, and it was reported in 2013 that she was working at a thrift store called The Beautiful Shop. But where is she now? According to a lot of the coverage I saw, she passed away in December of 2018. According to some, she took her own life. Some claim that she died of a random illness, and others claim the truth has never been revealed by her family. With this story in particular, I found a lot of discrepancies in the different coverage. Some of it was specific dates were different. In other reports, there was no shady doctor, and injecting herself was her own idea. Some sources said that she contacted the TV show herself and asked them for help. A lot of these discrepancies can be chalked up to people playing a massive online game of telephone with the story, and a lot of it is probably due to translation issues. Like, several of the more thorough articles I saw appeared to be Korean translated to Chinese translated to English, and some of them even included pictures of women who weren't her. For some reason though, it also seems like a lot of weird AI generated stuff is latched onto this story. For example, I couldn't find any articles that were specifically about her death, but I could find a bunch of sites that sell school essays that have pieces about her death and talking about how it's a cautionary tale. And perhaps the strangest of all, I found multiple sites claiming that she's married to Beau Biden, and they have 2 kids, Hunter Biden and Natalie Biden. Beau Biden, of course, is Joe Biden's son who died in 2015. Natalie is Beau's actual daughter. And Hunter, of course. You know Hunter. I am very confident in saying that none of this is true. I have no idea why the bots and AI think this. Perhaps it latched onto a joke someone made at some point and thought it was real. Perhaps it scraped the news site that happened to talk about the Bidens and this story on the same day. But in the history of me doing this channel, I don't think I've ever seen another story that was this fraught with so many different conflicting and usually obviously wrong stories. This last story takes us to Mexico, and thankfully this one has a happy ending. On March 25th of 2000, a 40-year-old pregnant woman went into labor. She lived in a very remote part of Mexico, and the nearest hospital was roughly an 8-hour drive away. It was getting late, and her husband was out drinking with no way to contact him. There was no way that she was getting to this hospital in time. She tried to tough it out for as long as she could, but after about 12 hours, she knew that this was it. That baby must come out. While it's not ideal for a woman to give birth on her own, it is something that's happened throughout history. And she already had 8 children, so she knew what to expect. But here's the thing. Her last pregnancy 3 years earlier ended with the baby dying because of an obstructed birth. She was not about to let that happen again. So here's what happens. She pours herself 3 shots of rubbing alcohol. She grabs a kitchen knife. And she slams those shots like she's Kurt Russell and gets to work. After about an hour-long struggle in a squatting position, and after 3 attempts, she eventually manages to slice herself from the vag upwards and create a hole big enough to pull the baby out. She cuts the umbilical cord with a pair of scissors, and the baby's healthy and crying. Then she wraps her wound in an old sweater and passes out. A bit later, she comes to and sees her 6-year-old. She tells him to go get help, and then she passes out again. Several hours later, the child returns with 2 nurses. The woman is conscious again, and one of the nurses stitches her back up with a needle and a thread. I'm not talking like some kind of medical grade needle and thread. I'm talking a needle and thread like you would mend a pair of pants with. She's driven to that faraway hospital in the city, where they find that despite there being nothing remotely sterile involved, there's no infection, and her organs are completely unharmed. Then they close her up with the real stuff, give her antibiotics, and her newborn leave the hospital a week and a half later with no problems. In March of 2004, 4 years after the incident, 4 of the doctors who handled the situation published their findings to the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics. Self-inflicted cesarean section with maternal and fetal survival. They noted that at this point, there are no other known cases where a woman performs a cesarean section on herself and survived. For reasons that are extremely obvious, the story began to receive attention. A few months later in June, the Associated Press would catch up with this woman who was identified as Inez Ramirez Perez, and her now 4-year-old son, Orlando, who at the time of the interview was healthy and playing with his dog in the yard. When asked what drove her to such an extreme, she had this to say: "If my baby was going to die, then I decided I would have to die too. But if he's going to grow up, I was going to see him grow up, and I was going to be with my child. I thought that God would save both our lives." She also noted that she was confident enough to do what she did because of her experiences with slaughtering livestock. I guess it's kind of the same thing. And also she warned that nobody else should try to do this. Obviously there is some skepticism towards her story because there were no eyewitnesses of her having done this, but as AP noted, all the doctors who saw her at the hospital are fully convinced that the story happened exactly as she tells it. One of the doctors that dealt with her when she arrived at the city hospital, Dr. Honorio Galvan, could not believe that someone did this without anesthesia and didn't die. He also noted that this could potentially tell us something about human immune systems. That she survived so much pain and developed no infections may tell us that there are populations with an innate resistance so strong that they can tolerate what urban groups can't. It's an incredible response of the human body. And I know there's probably some of you watching that are like, hey, maybe I'm one of the ones that has this super resistance. If you're watching this video, that is probably not you. There was a point in my life many years ago when I decided that I wanted to start trying to get in shape. However, I didn't really have the time or the money to start going to a gym. So I decided to go online and see if there was anything I could do at home to try and get in shape. And that's when I discovered a YouTube channel belonging to this man.
Losing weight and getting a tight, flat midsection is hard work, but you can do it without buying anything.
Scooby 1961. Scooby's sense of humor, his genuine concern for his audience, and his sizable library of content made his channel a great introduction to fitness for a lot of people, but not everyone was so fond of him. This is the story of Scooby's 4chan adventure. If you have ever gone online and looked for advice on how to work out at home, you've probably come across at least one of Scooby's videos. He was one of the very first fitness YouTubers on the entire platform, and his channel had a focus on workouts you could do at home with little or no equipment, healthy recipes, and giving his opinion on various debates within the fitness sphere. In addition to being a very early YouTube adopter who found a niche that hadn't yet been filled, a lot of people simply liked his content because he was a likable guy. As I once saw someone put it, he's basically the Mr. Rogers of fitness. And he also very quickly became a meme on various fitness forums, particularly the fitness board of 4chan. And this was due to a number of different factors, such as his very distinct appearance, which involved being shirtless, wearing either a bucket hat or a fedora. And then there were the constant debates over whether or not Scooby was natty, and he also had some controversial opinions people wanted to talk about, such as his dislike for squats. And although someone in Scooby's position, particularly someone Scooby's age, might want to steer away from 4chan due to all the mockery and the reputation the site had, Scooby actually did the opposite. In Fit, Scooby saw the opportunity to reach out to young people who were interested in fitness, which was something that Scooby was very passionate about, so he actually started using 4chan. He identified himself with a trip code and started giving out advice, participating in debates, and just overall being a part of the community. And he remained a somewhat active member of Fit for about a year until July of 2013. It was in July of 2013 that Scooby was doxxed. And this doxing was performed not by a user of Fit, but by a user of SP, the sports board of 4chan. These docs included Scooby's real name, his address, his work information, his phone number, and these docs also revealed that Scooby co-owned his home with another man with the same last name, outing him as gay. And although he had alluded to this in past blogs, and according to some people he had held a fan meetup at a gay bar, by and large, people were surprised by this revelation. And this revelation was the focus of a lot of the harassing phone calls that he quickly began to receive at work and at home. And that was in addition to death threats and people showing up and taking pictures of his house. And news of what was happening to Scooby quickly spread through the internet.
Apparently he went on a certain message board. I'm not going to name the message board. You don't even have to ask me in the comments if you don't want. But he went on a certain message board. I've read about this message board. It's known for hackers. They're very aggressive on this messaging board. Anyway.
And Scooby would return to that aggressive messaging board to make one final post. My year here on Fit has caused both incredible joy and incredible pain. I love you, at least 99% of you. I don't have time for a full goodbye letter now, but I will continue to communicate with Fit in my own puzzle master ways. Don't go looking for any hidden encoded messages for at least 6 months though, because it's going to take that long to get our lives back in order. My last YouTube video will go live in about 20 minutes. Auf Wiedersehen. And 20 minutes later, that video did indeed go live.
This is the last public video I'll be recording for this YouTube channel. It's time to move on. For the last decade, I've been showing young people how they can build stronger, leaner, more muscular, healthy physiques, all without spending a dime. As you know, I'm very passionate about health and fitness, and I'm glad I was able to pass that on to a next generation. I've always thought of you as my extended family, not as viewers or subscribers. I have just one favor to ask. For those of you who've benefited from my advice, please pass it on. Find some young, awkward kid who doesn't have self-confidence and is horrible at sports and take them under your wing. Show them about fitness. Show them the joys of lifting. Teach them about nutrition. Show them how to lift weights. And most of all, show them that the journey is just as important as the destination. Some recent very disturbing events require that some changes be made for the safety of my family, including relocation and shutting down social media. I honestly didn't mind the years of bashing me. I just took it as a sign that I was succeeding in getting my message across. But a line was crossed when my family got hurt. For the last time ever, Auf Wiedersehen.
Due to the doxing and harassment, Scooby would be forced to end his channel, leave social media, and move away from the home that he literally built with his own 2 hands. There was an outpouring of support from 4chan, Reddit, NeoGAF, GameFAQs, bodybuilding.com, basically anywhere that people might know about Scooby on the internet. God damn it, I'm feeling sad all of a sudden. Scooby was the first fitness source I went to when I started the journey, and still is my main inspiration. He is so humble, genuine, and passionate about helping folks out. He is someone I look up to not just for fitness advice, but also as a human being. Can you believe the amount of time and dedication it took to build his website, all the while not asking for a dime? We'll miss you, Scooby. Just please don't shut down Scooby's workshop too. I still visit it very often. And a lot of the comments people posted supporting him echoed these sentiments. For a lot of people, Scooby was their gateway into taking fitness more seriously. Who would do something like this to such a beloved creator? Scooby had suspected that it might be a competitor inside the fitness sphere. And according to a person on Reddit who claimed to be the Doxer, this was all orchestrated by a rising fitness star. The then 19 years old Jeff Side. The poster claimed that Jeff's beef with Scooby came from an April Fool's Day video mocking him, entitled, "Le Cookies Are Ready."
Today I'm going to show you how to make some really healthy cookies.
And the video was captioned with this disclaimer by Scooby. Why did I do this video other than the obvious fact it was April Fool's Day? Well, you know I worry about teen self-confidence. This is the reason I have pushed so hard over the years to set people's bodybuilding expectations at achievable levels to keep teens from labeling themselves as inferior, hard gainers, when they are in fact either normal or have good genetics. As I mentioned above, when I was in high school I was an outcast. Reasonably smart, but awkward, shy, and completely lacking in self-confidence. Although many teens put on an act and appear confident, many have just as low of self-esteem as I had. For some teens, it's even worse, and borders on depression. So how does this relate to Jeff? Well, if you watched his videos, you will have to agree that he sends the "I'm so fabulous and you are not" message, and that's the last thing that teens need to hear. Teens need help boosting their confidence. They don't need to hear about how fabulous Jeff's life is, and how he drops a couple thousand on his website like it was candy money. Everyone, even losers, have hidden talents that they just need to find. Trouble is, Jeff's talents are right out there in your face and he doesn't even realize he is rubbing salt in the wounds of hundreds of thousands of teens. A little bit of humble and compassion for those not so blessed as himself would go a long way were he to apply it. The purpose of this video is to give him a gentle reminder of this. And then on April 3rd he added this little edit. For 3/13, it has come to my attention that Jeff's dog died recently. This was completely unknown to me at the time I wrote the script for this video. I myself am an incredible animal lover, and our animals are part of the family, they are not pets. I grieve with him in the loss of his dog, and had I known, I certainly would not have included that line in the video.
I volunteer at the local animal shelter where people drop off all these unwanted puppies, and I have the honor of euthanizing these puppies and shit like that.
As proof of Jeff's involvement, the Reddit poster included a screenshot of a PayPal transaction with Jeff's side. However, as a number of users on both Reddit and bodybuilding.com noted, it's very easy to fake a PayPal screenshot. And even if the screenshot were legit, it's not really proof that he paid for doxing, just that he paid for something. The post could just as easily have been an attempt to attack Jeff's reputation. But ultimately there's no way for us to know for sure. But after so many years of putting out content, what would fitness YouTube look like with Scooby leaving the public sphere and relegating himself only to private offerings? Well, in August of 2013, after Scooby uploaded his last 2 videos in his fitness bootcamp series that he promised, he uploaded another video, and on that video he left this comment. "Until I figure out how to start a new YouTube channel, I will continue to upload here. It's been nearly a decade since I had to figure out this stuff." Smiley face. And it appears that Scooby has never actually figured out how to make his new channel. To this day, Scooby is still frequently uploading new content to his channel. This makes him not only one of the longest running fitness YouTubers, but one of the longest running creators on this platform as a whole. Approaching the age of 60, Scooby continues to upload fitness advice. And over the years, he's gradually expanded the scope of his content, including vlogs of his travels, opinions,
I hate sappy Christmas music.
and more general advice. He also still brings it on April Fool's Day.
I figure that since everyone figures I use performance-enhancing drugs anyway, I might as well do a cycle and show people what I can really look like when I give up my natty card.
So ultimately, although it looked really, really bad at first, that doxer failed to end the careers of one of YouTube's first fitness personalities. On June 30th of 1971, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory debuted in theaters. Roald Dahl, who wrote the book it was based on, as well as the original screenplay, absolutely hated the film for a variety of reasons. These reasons included changes made to his work, the focus on Willy Wonka instead of Charlie, and the casting of Gene Wilder. And at first, the film wasn't much of a success at all. It barely made back its budget. But in the years following, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory would slowly become one of cinema's greatest cultural touchstones. Several popular airings on TV and its VHS release in 1984 made it a formative movie in a lot of people's childhoods, some in more bizarre ways than others. For a lot of people, the most consequential scene was the one in which Violet, after snatching Willy Wonka's gum and chewing on it despite his warnings, turns into a big blueberry. Her skin becomes blue and she inflates like a balloon, and then she's rolled away by the Oompa Loompas. In the book, she explodes and dies, but you can't put that in a kid's movie. For most viewers, this is just a silly gag and a little bit of a moral lesson, but for some, it was their first exposure to body horror, leaving them to mentally fill in the gruesome details of Violet's fate. But for some viewers, this scene opened up their mind to a world of exciting possibilities, shaping their predilections through adulthood. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about body inflation fetishists. I think when most people hear the word fetish, they think about BDSM. You know, whips and rope and leather and whatnot. But that's just scratching the surface, of course. I'm sure that you, as a viewer of this channel, have come across much stranger stuff. I'm not even talking about like more extreme fetishes, stuff like poo or pee, or getting your dick flattened. I'm talking about stuff that's generally harmless, but it's so absurdly specific that you're like, how did someone even come to realize that they're into this? For example, you got vor, where someone gets off on being swallowed whole by a giant carnivorous plant, or by Bowser or something. You got, I don't even know what the name for this is. People want to have like alien eggs laid inside of them. They even got like these alien dick toys that they spit out dissolving eggs. One of the funniest ones to me is body inflation, where a person gets partially or entirely inflated like a balloon. Like you picked up that balloon power up in Super Mario World. Which there's probably some people who were playing that game back in the day and they were like, wait a second, this is working for me. But in the way that Sally Acorn or Lola Bunny were a lot of people's furry awakenings. It seems like the genesis for the inflation fetish for a lot of people was that scene from Willy Wonka. In fact, this scene even led to a more specific genre, blueberry porn. You even got like this one dude, Cody Sprayberry, who has a whole blueberry OnlyFans. But for the people who found their souls touched by that Willy Wonka scene, it generally manifested in more of a general interest in the idea of blowing up. They were more interested in that than the fruit. But of course, Willy Wonka came out all the way back in 1971. You didn't have terminally online internet fetish people in 1971. To paraphrase a very poignant post that was once made on 4chan, back in the old days before the internet, you might think, hey, maybe I want to fuck a toaster. Your friends make fun of you for it, and that's the end of it. After the internet, you think, hey, maybe I want to fuck a toaster. Then you go online and find the greater toaster fetishist community, and that's your life now. It all seems like a very modern phenomenon because we all have some sense of that, but the inflation community actually goes back way further than I would have guessed. In the fall of 2008, the British magazine Forum interviewed a man who goes by the name Inflate123. As one of the founding members of the community, he gives a lot of insight into how the community was formed and how these communities form in general. He began to think about inflation after having a dream as a child where he turned into a balloon and floated helplessly up into the sky. And he mentioned that an aspect that he finds appealing about all this is the helplessness to stop or control the inflation, something that the interview compared to a sub-dom dynamic. In 1994, after he moved into his own place and had more privacy, he started looking for inflation content to scratch that itch. And he found that there was basically nothing. So he began to look around for posts by like-minded people. He found a person on Usenet talking about a movie with an inflatable corset. He also found some people making posts about erotic elements of balloons and various types of inflatables. He started reaching out to these people, and eventually he had himself a mailing list of about 12 people.
This was the early inflation fetish community. Within a year, it ballooned into about 200 people. But the thing is, as I suspected when I started working on this video, inflation is really a bunch of similar but different fetishes that are caught under the same umbrella. You can notice how different artists focus on different aspects of blowing up. For example, Inflate told the interviewer that a big draw of it for him is seeing the natural human form expanded. Like, you might like big boobs, but what if they were even bigger, blown up like a balloon? And he also said that to some extent, his partner's implants feed into this fetish. There's also some people that want to see the inflated person pop, while there's others that are strongly opposed to it. We split off into different groups based on specific interests that had cropped up as common themes. Lunars, breast expansion, body inflation, and pool toys / vinyl animals. Everyone was friendly, but it became clear that there was enough diversity that we should each set up camps and stay in touch. At the time of the interview, Inflate was making a website called Airy Tales. It collected some stories from the community, including things like Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood and how she became not so little, and Goldilocks and the Three Heirs. Like a lot of communities in the pre-social media era, it was more spread across a bunch of websites maintained by individuals. For instance, another interesting site I came across was bodyinflation.org, which was made by Luther Kane in 1997, and still exists to this very day. Features on the original website include art of celebrities inflated, including people like Tiffany Amber Thiessen, Soleil Moonfry, Cindy Crawford, and Courtney Cox. It also had a list of movies with inflation scenes. Aside from the obvious Willy Wonka scene, you got stuff like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, 1988. In one scene, the guys who drive the ice cream truck fall through a trapdoor in the clown's spaceship. They fall into a pit of plastic balls. On the edge of the pit sit two female alien clowns whose breasts inflate. The female clowns are butt ugly, just letting you know. I guess this is like their version of rubbing one out to the Sears catalog. Back to the Inflate 123 interview, he mentioned something else that's a big part of the community. He purchased an inflatable cat suit from a company named Cocoon. He mentions that it wasn't really what he was looking for. There just wasn't enough feeling of that internal pressure as it inflated. Although Inflate was unhappy with his purchase, there were some people with better access to better stuff. In fact, these kinds of suits were the specialty of perhaps the most well-known member of the community, at least in the mainstream consciousness. Of course, I'm speaking of the one and only Mr. Blowup. Although none of his several official websites appear to have been archived well enough to browse, a lot of his story can be gathered through various publications. In August of 2000, The Guardian attended the London Fetish Fair, where the reporter Nick Barley spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Blowup. In the article, they're described as rubber fetishists, and it doesn't really go into the idea of inflation at all, just that they're web designers who had been in the scene for 25 years at that point. Although in one quote taken from him, Mr. Blowup does echo Inflate 123's sentiments about the lack of resources in the early days. You couldn't get the stuff in shops. There were no clubs and very few magazines. Now there are more shops in the UK than almost anywhere else. A few years later, BBC would take a closer look at him. We get to see him at home using some of his suits with the help of his wife. And we also see pictures of his friends who are also in on the fetish. He mentions that his interest developed in childhood.
I think we had a sort of plastic beach ball at home, and my friends had these inflatable paddling pools, and I found those very interesting, and I often wondered what it would be like to sort of get inside something like that, or have an outfit that inflated.
Like Inflate 123, he also found that he was seeking the pressure from the inflation suits. He says it's relaxing and a way to unwind.
I'm in a sort of fetal position in here, sitting on the floor with my knees up under my chin and my arms around my legs.
And like Inflate, he also found his community through the early internet. We even get a glance at his website at the time. It's funny, pretty much every friend I've shown this clip to while working on this video had more or less the same reaction. They're expecting to laugh at some creepy weirdo, but then they're kind of taken aback by this gentle, soft-spoken man who was lucky enough to find a supportive group of friends. It's still funny to watch him blow up though. A much more in-depth look at Mr. Blowup was given in an article he wrote for Secret magazine at some point in the early 2000s. He mentions that he's 43 years old and lives with his wife just outside of London. Rubber fetishism is just one of his interests, which also include things like reading, music, travel, and preserved railways. And the interest in railways actually makes a lot of things make sense. In this article, he once again mentions the relaxing nature of the inflatables. I mentioned that at times his wife has used his suits not as a fetish device, but as a way to stay focused while reading. He also speaks about how until he met his wife somewhat recently, none of his several previous girlfriends were interested in engaging with the rubber fetish at all. In fact, Mrs. Blowup not only just tolerated tolerated his interest. She helped nurture it, helping him build a growing collection of inflatables. So listen, if a rubber fetishist in his 40s can finally meet his perfect match, there's no reason to settle for less. In fact, within a short while of meeting her, we were attending the fetish clubs and events in London. We have quite a large collection of rubber now, ranging from conventional items like vests and shorts, up to catsuits of various types and colors, 2 long capes, a rubber maid's dress, 2 long dresses, and red and black high-heeled rubber boots. Our bed has a black rubber sheet on it, with 2 rubber pillowcases. We also have, of course, the inflatables, including an inflatable total enclosure body bag, several hoods, and a catsuit. He also spoke about how he's modified some of the devices and his goals of making his own, although budget concerns were limiting him at the time. He concludes the article by looking towards the future. As for the future years, as a married man, I now have other priorities, such as the maintenance of a house and 2 cars, and the purchase of computer equipment for our web design consultancy, which means that I cannot spend as much time as I'd like in our rubber collection. Like thousands of other people in England, we firmly believe that one day we'll win the lottery jackpot. Unlike them, however, we won't squander our money on houses or cars. We'll spend it sensibly on the most comprehensive collection of rubber things my imagination can dream up, probably making a few suppliers very rich as well. Overall, he just seems like a really nice guy with a strange but harmless fixation. I've kind of noticed this to be a thing sometimes with these kinds of stories. Like, you'll assume someone's gonna be some kind of deranged maniac, but having found their peace in life against all odds, they're strangely well adjusted. Unfortunately, I found a Flickr post from September 15th, 2020, posted by Lula in memoriam of Mr. Blowup. The person who posted this appears to be a part of the community who would know what's going on, so I think it's likely that Mr. Blowup did indeed pass away. He would have been about 60 years old at the time. Now, going back to the idea that inflation is a collection of similar but different fetishes under the same umbrella, I think that what Mr. Inflate does isn't exactly what a lot of people think of when we hear about inflation. In a lot of ways, it's kind of the opposite. While he was seeking to feel the pressure coming in on him from the outside and kind of have the inflatable squeeze him, what I usually picture when I hear about this is people getting inflated from the inside out. Usually like Sonic the Hedgehog or some random fursona. In fact, I want to say like 99% of the inflation stuff I've ever seen was furries. Which it seems a little bit odd considering that the Willy Wonka scene has absolutely nothing to do with furries or animals of any kind. When looking into this phenomenon, I actually came across a post on r/furry. Why are inflation and fecal-related fetishes the most popular on sites like FA? It seems like every 3 pictures on Fur Affinity, there is an inflation picture, a vor picture, a fat belly picture, a diaper picture, or a shit picture. I am just curious. I never see this kind of fetish anywhere else on any kind of site but on furry sites. The inflation feces-related fetishes run rampant. I mean, go look for yourself. Go to browse, and there are probably at least 4 inflation or diaper pictures. I'm just curious as to why these fetishes / drawing style / interests seem to line up with the furry community. I personally find it a little weird for relatively cool furries to be painting pictures of otherwise beautiful fursonas, but then ruin it with a poopy diaper or a huge belly. I don't understand. Can someone explain? An explanation was given by a user named Cultzar. I can give a possible explanation for the inflation stuff. Fur Affinity was started by a fur who was into inflation. It was advertised as an alternative to other art sites where that sort of thing wasn't very well received. So much of the early community was into inflation. It still has a surprisingly large inflation community on the site. So as I understand it, Fur Affinity was originally a bit of a containment zone for furries with weird fetishes. But eventually they just vastly outgrew all the people they are being contained from. It makes sense that such a large website would be able to shape the culture like that. But I also think there's another reason. Furries are famously the greatest art patrons of our time. A lot of artists who aren't furries and have no interest in that stuff have openly admitted that it's basically rich furries who are keeping the lights on. And this sort of inflation can basically only ever be depicted in art, because you can't do it in real life without dying. There's been several cases of accidental deaths throughout the world where someone got air inside of them and croaked. I recently covered one of these incidents in a short, in which an Indian factory worker's insides ruptured when his boss blew compressed air up his butt as a joke. And there are countless incidents like this around the world. You might think, oh, it's just air, but you can do some real damage with it. That being said though, I did come across one man who inflated like this and survived.
Steve McCormack was a truck driver from New Zealand. At 48 years old, his career had mostly been without incident. But in an instant, a freak accident had people saying he was lucky to be alive. On May 21st of 2011, while on his route traveling through the town of Opotiki, Stephen fell between the cab and trailer of his truck. He landed onto the air hose, breaking it. As he landed, the hose was still pumping air, and its brass nozzle tore into his butt cheek, and it began to actually inflate his butt. I know this sounds like someone's fetish story that they wrote, but this is a real thing that happened. He described what it felt like to a local publication, the Wakatane Beacon. I felt the air rush into my body, and I felt like it was going to explode from my foot. I was blowing up like a football. I felt like I had the bends, like in diving. I had no choice but to just lay there blowing up like a balloon. The nozzle had positioned itself where it was just inside his skin and his muscle tissue. It wasn't inside his gut or any part of the digestive system, which is what killed all those other guys. It was agonizing, separating his fat from his muscle, and it took his body days to deflate, leaving his skin in a condition that he compared to a roast pork. And there's probably aspects of this that sound like a dream to this brand of inflation fetishist, but I imagine the pain and likely permanent injuries would be a lot more than they'd bargained for, even with the prospect of surviving the ordeal. Like, I'm sure there's probably maybe 2 or 3 people coming across this video that are actual inflation fetishes, and they're hearing that story for the first time and writing it down in their notebook. Don't try this on purpose, please. I have a vague recollection of this one TV series from 1989. It was called Alienation, and it was a police procedural show based on a buddy cop film of the same name. It follows the story of 2 cops, a human and an alien, in the near future of the year 1990. Look at those prosthetics. You're never gonna see a primetime TV show like this again. That being said, I never actually watched it. I mean, I was a literal child, it wasn't for me. But I did see one scene of it by accident. And what are the odds? It's probably the most infamous scene from that show. The alien cop's alien wife is pregnant, and she takes the baby out of her, and then he puts it in his body to finish the pregnancy, because that's how those kind of aliens work. And in the middle of the baby trade-off, they take a piece off the gestating fetus and eat it. Despite never really watching the show and only having a vague understanding of what's even going on when I saw it, that scene stuck with me for the rest of my life. And then when I eventually learned that some women eat the placenta when they give birth, that was the first thing I thought of. In fact, when I hear about it, that's still the first thing I think of, which is why it's in this video. Well, if you were disturbed by that image, I got something even better for you, and this one's real. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the tale of the afterbirth jerky. Eating the placenta is a practice that has a long history in certain parts of the world. Although there's debate among historians over how prevalent it actually was, there's incidents of it documented as far back as a few hundred years BC. Technically called placentophagy, which reminds me of the movie Anthropophagus, where they don't just eat the placenta, they eat the whole baby. In the US though, it first became a trend in the 70s, with people citing health benefits like a restored hormone balance, better mood, increased milk production. Critics of course say there's no evidence that any of this is true. And since during pregnancy the placenta acts as a big filter to keep the baby safe from disease and whatnot, some people say you're basically eating a giant disease sponge. And there's been cases where people have gotten sick from it, most notably one where a newborn got strep on multiple occasions and was eventually traced back to contamination in placenta pills that its mother was eating. Since then, the CDC has begun to advise against eating the placenta. You know, who really cares what the CDC thinks? People are going to eat it regardless, and it's a trend that comes and goes throughout the years. Most recently, it was getting popular in 2013 or so when celebrities like Kim Kardashian were doing it. And of course, when you've got a new sort of gross trend in the early 2010s, you've also got, of course, some incredible posts. You know, I mean, of course, us millennials, we love to be foodies. We love a good $20 burger on a square plate with a knife in it. So you can't just eat the placenta straight up. You got people getting fancy with stir-fry recipes and scrambled eggs and whatnot. But a lot of times, having a placenta laying around at home just doesn't go as planned. A book about midwifery I read had a story about how she delivered a placenta that was unusual in appearance at a home birth. She wanted to research it a bit and took it home, flattened it out, wrapped it in plastic, and stuck it in her freezer. Her teenage son thought it was a frozen pizza, which came home to the house smelling like a wild animal because he was heating it in the oven. Nobody ate it, but that has to be a funky aroma. You also had this one couple that kept their placenta and they weren't planning to eat it. What they were gonna do is they were gonna dig a big hole in the yard, bury the placenta, and then plant a tree on top of it. So then the tree grows with the child. It's actually kind of a cute idea. But they're so busy with the newborn baby, they don't really have time to go dig a hole in the yard, so the placenta lays around for a bit. Then one day, they get home and the placenta is missing. They're looking around for it and they find their dog sitting in the corner. He's really happy, and he's got a mysteriously placenta-shaped belly. That dog probably thinks about this feast every single day of its life. If he could tell his friends about it, they wouldn't believe him. And it's not just women and dogs hopping on this trend. You had a woman on Reddit whose husband wanted to eat it, thinking that the stem cells would help his injury. But as much as I like to think that the reason why Rey Mysterio Jr. is now moving around like he's in his 20s again is that he was sitting in a hospital in Mexico just snacking on placentas, people in the comments were quick to note that stem cell therapy doesn't actually work like Christopher Reeves on South Park. Although, you know, it's still not as outlandish of a theory as that Irish guy that injected cum into his arm to fix his back pain. People also noted that whatever benefits may or may not exist for a woman eating the placenta, they definitely don't exist for the husband. In fact, some theorize, I don't know if this is true or not, but some theorize that eating the placenta as a man might actually be like taking a giant estrogen pill. Dude's gonna wind up like Ranma. And now, while you see a lot of people who are posting their best placenta and egg recipes, in general, the people who are really serious about the health benefits aren't doing meals. What they do is they have their placenta dehydrated and put into capsules that they take over a period of 90 days or so. There's a lot of companies that provide this service, but there's also a lot of people that advise doing it yourself. And one Redditor named Puta Gatito documented the whole process. My doctor let me take home my placenta. Now I eat a little bit every day. The way she worded it, I pictured the placenta sitting on her counter and she occasionally takes a few bites of it. And attached is an imager album that goes into a lot more detail. And there's the placenta right there. Actually, kind of looks like Squidward if he was in pain. 4 months into her pregnancy, she decided she wanted to eat the placenta, but she wasn't really interested in the health benefits. She was just curious about what it would taste like. Only after looking into it did she find that there actually may be some health benefits. But still, as you can see from her Snapchat post, she's still having fun with it. At first, she was considering going to one of the pill companies that I mentioned before, but like a lot of people, she found that it was just more than she wanted to pay. She was also kind of grossed out by the idea that her placenta was going to go on machinery that all these other placentas went on. Like the lab techs are just stacking them up.
Because he can eat any more pancakes than any man alive?
And a lot of people in the comments section were like, wait, that's the thing that grossed you out? So if you're going to make placenta pills, first you gotta dehydrate the placenta. So she decides she's gonna borrow her mother's food dehydrator. Although I imagine that after this, her mother will just let her keep it. Now she has the equipment, she quickly realizes that she has no idea what she's doing. But that placenta ain't getting any fresher, so there's no turning back now. You can't just plop the whole placenta down on the food dehydrator, it's not gonna work. First, you gotta gut it like a Thanksgiving turkey. She removes the umbilical cord and cuts it open, and it kinda looks like a watermelon. And with that caption she put, "Eat me, eat me." I can't help but think of 1988's The Abomination. But those watermelon seeds you got there, those are actually blood clots. She removes the seeds and notes that it smells like a mix of raw pork and of course, a lot of blood. She's not quite sure what to do next, so she decides to just cut them into little strips like she would if she was making fajitas. Which actually, according to the DIY guide I found, is what you're supposed to do. Although the guide I found also recommended adding lemon and ginger. It's probably kind of nice. She begins dehydrating the pieces and they start to look exactly like Chinese boneless ribs. But as they're dehydrating, she realizes that the pieces she cut are too thick to fully dehydrate. So she cuts them in half and then she manages to fit everything. With her placental mise en page now complete, she decides to move it. I placed the dehydrator in the garage in anticipation of the odor. An hour and a half in, there was surprisingly no smell at all. Unfortunately, the smell did come. The smell was like dry cat/dog food. It wasn't terrible, but if you walked by my house, it definitely smelled like I had 20 cats in my garage minus the pee smell of cat hoarding. The whole process took 4.5 hours. And when it was complete, she noted that it was very rubbery, even more so than beef jerky. She then cleans the dehydrator and puts it back in the cabinet for future use. And she notes that it was easier to fully clean than she expected. But I feel like no matter how good you clean that, it's gotta still impart some kind of flavor. I just think of that guy that was like, wow, why does everything I cook in my slow cooker taste amazing? And then he opens it up and finds a bunch of dead lizards inside the heating element. In any case, we're done with the food dehydrator now. It's time to grab the coffee grinder. She quickly discovers that grinding up the placenta bits makes it smell even worse. And because of that smell and the rubbery texture, she was kinda worried that eating this would make her sick. So she decides to go full Anderson smoke show mode and wraps a baking sheet in foil and bakes the afterbirth grinds.
This is gonna make for some easy cleanup.
Terrible idea. Since it was so finely ground, it started smoking almost immediately. My house reeked for 3 days. But despite the smell and the burning, it actually turned out fine. She says that she takes one a day and they work amazingly. Although people in the comments were like, work amazingly how? What does it do? And they weren't satisfied with any of the answers they got. In general, the response was kind of varied. I find the science behind the claimed benefits to this to be questionable. Also, possibly insane. Placebo. But hell, what do I know? I'm just a biologist. You had other people that did think the benefits were real, but she ruined them by cooking the nutrients out. Others were just grossed out. You're a fucking disgusting lunatic. No offense, but seriously, what the fuck is the master with you? That you would even think of doing this, let alone follow through. If my wife did this after having a loss, I'd probably try to get custody of the kid and get her the help she obviously needs. My fiance just gave birth on October 9th. It was not beautiful or amazing. It was horrifying. Watching it happen has given me nightmares since. The doctor pulling the placenta out of her was even worse than the birth. At no point during or after the birth did either of us think, let's eat that stuff that just came out of you. This post has made me sick. May FSM have mercy on your soul. Goddamn, I totally forgot flying spaghetti monster was the thing. And some people pointed out that this is actually relatively common. Back in the late 80s/early 90s, I worked in a photo lab. The amount of photos I processed that showed people cooking and eating placenta as a family meal after the birth of a baby was not as uncommon as I'd hoped. Hey, you go girl, you're amazing. Hey, you go girl, you're amazing. This is a very common practice. Placenta is what keeps a baby healthy in the womb. Why wouldn't she make capsules out of it? It gave a baby all the nutrient for 9 months, and it's so good. It's so normal. I had a C-section and forgot to ask about it beforehand, so it was gone before I remembered. I am doing this with my next child, and I am so glad you did it. Tires keep me healthy on the road, but I don't want to eat them. People also noticed that in this time period, she had posted a r/cooking asking for chicken liver recipes. And while at first you might think, oh, that's just some kind of a coincidence, when I was researching this video, I noticed so many people saying that the placenta tastes like a chicken liver. So maybe she was trying to figure out how to cook it then. More than anything though, it seemed like people were mostly just disappointed that even though her original intention was to just eat it out of curiosity, and despite it at one point looking like a succulent Chinese meal, she never actually ate the placenta chunks. Seriously, cook that shit like a steak. I felt like OP just kept trying every method possible to avoid doing direct consumption. This is like some half-hearted attempt between being edgy and being a giant pussy. Wait, P. Hubens, I know that guy. Actually, I'm gonna shout out his game UFO 50 because I was playing it last night and it's really good. So if that's where you're at right now, 2016 Jason Blaha has something for you.
Fake natty Aaron Curtis, someone who's been on my radar for a little while, decided to eat his wife's placenta for gains.
I thought I better cook it and wash off some of the slime before I eat it to minimize the chance of dying.
Entree of his daughter's placenta.
Tastes like liver, I think.
Liver?
That is some seriously disgusting shit.
On March 20th of 2010, Sarah Caldwell of Plymouth went to bed with a severe migraine headache. She had been dealing with these for the past several years, but this time, it was different. When she woke up, the pain was so much more intense than usual, so much so that she had to call an ambulance. She had previously been diagnosed with a form of migraines that interrupts the blood flow in such a way that it causes stroke-like symptoms. So this was absolutely major cause for concern. And in this episode, doctors had actually determined that she had suffered several attacks at once. Without a doubt, she had experienced some amount of brain damage. But nobody could have expected the results of this brain damage. You see, when she woke up, she suddenly had a Chinese accent. Clearly, Pilgrim is becoming too powerful. For today's video, let's take a look at the woman who turned Chinese. Listen, not everyone's gonna agree with me, but personally, I love a good impression of a foreign accent.
Oh, would you like me to park your car?
Maybe I'm immature or whatever, I don't know. I don't think it's a mean or hateful thing unless you make it that. That being said though, it's funny for a few minutes and you're like, alright, that's enough of that. But what if you just stuck like that? Forever. It sounds like the plot of a movie from the 70s where people would be like, oh, you couldn't make that nowadays. But for Sarah Caldwell, this was reality. At that point, she was 35 years old and lived in Plymouth basically her whole life. She had never been to China before, and frankly just doesn't strike me as the kind of person that sits around doing accents as a bit. She had what's described as a strong Devon accent. I'm an American and I have no idea what that is. So I found this video from Magenta Otter Travels talking to some of the locals with Devon accents.
Every word has at least 4 R's in it, and every verb is regular. We be, they be, us be.
Where be that to?
Okay, so instead of saying, where is it, you would say,
where be that to?
In all honesty, I'm not sure that I could distinguish that from any other kind of British accent, but it's clearly a far cry from this.
It wasn't until I was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital to actually say, are you aware of the way you're speaking? And I said, oh, I sound like I have a slur. And she said, no, you sound like you can work at a Chinese restaurant.
About a month after the incident, she spoke to The Guardian about what she had been experiencing. I spoke to my stepdaughter on the phone from hospital, and I'm inclined to point out that when she says from hospital instead of from the hospital, I'm not sure if that's a typo or if that's how she actually said it. And she didn't recognize who I was. She said I sounded Chinese. Since then, I have had my friends hanging up on me because they think I'm a hoax caller. She also noted that even as the paramedics came to her home on the initial call, they remarked that she sounded Chinese. Normally, effects like this from a stroke would last up to 7 days. But because of the severity of the attack, it was unknown if she would ever get her original voice back. Caldwell, who lives with her husband Patrick in Plymouth, added, "The first few weeks of the accent was quite funny, but to think I am stuck with this Chinese accent is getting me down. My voice has started to annoy me now. It is not my voice." At that point, she had already begun working with a speech therapist, but she wasn't making much progress. And now, I imagine that a lot of you are having the same initial thought that I did. She's faking this. As soon as I heard the story, I immediately thought about that cheerleader who had that muscle disorder that turned out to be fake. Like they caught her red-handed. Wavy Websurf actually covered that story years ago, and conveniently, he actually opens his video talking about what you would call such a thing. A factitious disorder.
Factitious disorders are conditions in which a person deliberately and consciously acts as if he or she has a physical or mental illness when he or she is not really sick.
That being said though, as much as waking up from a stroke with a Chinese accent sounds like God called up Nick Mullen and asked him to invent the disease, what this lady was experiencing is a real condition that's been documented as far back as 1907. It's called Foreign Accent Syndrome, or FAS, and it's extremely rare. I've seen total cases worldwide reported to be between 20 and 150, which at either end of that spectrum, that's not a lot of people. It almost always happens as the result of a stroke or some kind of brain injury, although there was a recent case in which a cancer patient developed an Irish accent. If you want some examples of the variety of accents people will wind up with, 60 Minutes Australia spoke to a few other people with this condition, including an Australian woman with an Eastern European accent.
Interesting that you perceive it that way, because I'm actually Australian.
And a British woman with a French accent.
When I heard my speech, and the speech process in my head was totally different.
Around the time of the early coverage, Sarah had been contacted by Professor John Coleman, a phonetics expert who researches the condition and wanted to study her. He said this to The Guardian. FAS is extremely diverse, and is almost certainly not caused by one thing. It is not a well-defined medical phenomenon, and therefore not the kind of problem that there are any easy generalizations about. It's also important to note here that this isn't just some quirky, silly thing that happened and made her life full of all kinds of goofs and whatnot. She basically lost everything over this. When she first had the stroke-like incident, she was working as an IT coordinator. But in addition to how it changed her accent, these migraines, which would continue afterwards, gave her debilitating mobility issues, which would sometimes paralyze her entirely. This forced her to leave her job and eventually sell her house. In 2013, she would star in a BBC documentary entitled The Woman Who Woke Up Chinese, which follows her struggles to live with this bizarre condition. I was unable to find the full documentary, but there are clips floating around, including one where she meets with her speech therapist, Martin Duckworth, at Marjan's. Although she still has the accent, she says she feels more comfortable with it now. Maggie Cooper, Marjan's head of applied language sciences, says that although they can't give a definitive answer to why exactly this is happening, something happened in her brain that affects how she organizes her speech output. The documentary also answers one of the biggest questions I had about this condition. The answer is yes. People are constantly asking her to say pork fried rice. Like I said, I wasn't able to find the full documentary, but I was able to piece parts of it together from reviews. And according to Time Out, it's actually uncomfortable how much they have her order Chinese food in the documentary. And despite the apparent progress she was making in the documentary, in 2015 there was follow-up coverage by SWNS that revealed she had learned her condition was permanent, that all different kinds of treatments were attempted and none of them seemed to be doing anything. Being told I would be like this forever was a heartbreaking thing to hear. It was a real bombshell. But then surprisingly, she would speak to them again in 2016. Things had once again taken a turn, this time for the better. You see, in the previous 7 weeks before that article, she had actually been making a lot of progress, both with her mobility and with her speech. Because it's been so long, you learn like a child would. you listen to the people around you, it shows my brain is still learning. The physio said, I walk like a toddler, so she is now teaching me how to walk without holding on to things. So it's the same with my speech. The more I'm around people and pick up on how they speak, the more I learn. That has been quite hopeful for me. I'm learning all the time. After this article, which ends on a relatively hopeful note, you don't really hear much from her for several years. But then in 2022, she pops back up. That June, she would make a TikTok account. And on the 9th of June, she uploads this video.
Hello, this is my first TikTok. Many people ask for update on my condition, how I am now. As you can hear today, my speech is disturbed because I had many migraine. The last 3 days with non-epileptic seizure. But pretty much now I sound English. Back to my normal accent. It is normally only disturbed, like sounding like this, and I struggle to find words when I've had particularly bad spate of migraine. I've also had facial paralysis and some left-sided weakness from the hemiplegia. But yeah, I thought maybe TikTok would be a good place for post-update.
So here she's still talking with the accent, but she says it's because her migraines were acting up recently and she doesn't normally talk like that anymore. Something she demonstrated in a TikTok on June 11th, where for the first time we hear her actual voice.
So I thought I'd give you all a quick update. As the day's gone on, my speech and everything is starting to come back to normal. The migraines disappeared. And hopefully, the next few days I'll be fully recovered.
In the following weeks, she would post TikToks of her both with and without the accent, as well as some clips of her pets. And in her bio, it says, I didn't say I sounded Chinese, you did. Which, you know, kind of does put things into a different perspective. Although at times she did refer to it as a Chinese accent herself, that was a description that was first given by everyone else around her. And although foreign accent syndrome is exceptionally rare, it's extremely common for strokes to affect people's speech. So it's quite possible that what's actually happening with this condition is you're getting people whose speech is affected physically by the stroke as with any other stroke, but in these cases it's manifesting in a way that sounds to us like an accent. It's not necessarily that her brain is saying, okay, do a Chinese accent. It's that what it's causing her to do sounds Chinese to us. It's hard to tell for sure, especially with so few cases that have been studied, and I'm sure a lot of you still think she's just really committed to the bit. In 1993, during the final days of the NES's run, Nintendo would release an educational game called Mario is Missing. Much like his counterpart in Super Hornio Brothers 2, Bowser would enter the real world, and when he gets there, he kidnaps Mario, forcing Luigi and Yoshi to travel around famous cities and learn about famous landmarks to save him. Nobody seems to care about Luigi unless Mario's in trouble. Mario is Missing is considered to be one of the worst Mario games ever. At best, people have called it mind-numbingly repetitive and boring, and the controls are weirdly designed. Honestly, I thought the game was alright. It was an educational game and I retained none of the knowledge, but I played it a lot. Most people didn't share this view though.
I don't want to be educated. I want to rot my brain.
Alright, so edutainment isn't for everyone. You know how you could fix this problem? What if you took Mario is Missing, but you made it sexy? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Mario is Missing 2, Peach's Untold Story. In 2010, a fan game was uploaded to Newgrounds by user PlayShapes, a new side-scroller starring Princess Peach, an adult game called Mario is Missing. When I say an adult game now, of course I don't mean that the questions were more difficult in this version. Well, porn parody games on Newgrounds are a dime a dozen. I mean, who could forget classics like Kramer's Hentai Adventure?
I'm Cosmo Kramer, the Yes-Man.
And Mario is Missing actually wound up being pretty good, and it wound up being a big hit. PlayShapes found so much success with this game that they wound up toying around with the idea of making a Mario is Missing 2. But in speaking about this publicly, he created a monster. People wanted this game a little too much. Over-eager fans kept on bothering PlayShapes about it, and eventually he'd had enough. So on September 27th of 2010, PlayShapes would leave a post on Newgrounds that he was over this community. He's just a man, not a company. He's not associated with any forum, and you are not getting Mario is Missing 2. And on April 5th of 2012, PlayShapes would post that 16 months of his work would be handed over to the Legends of Crystal's forums for them to do whatever they want with. And that brings us to the man behind Peach's Untold Story.
one Ivan Adler. According to his DeviantArt page, he was a Brazilian man whose favorite type of game was hentai. Which, I mean, come on, it's too general. It's a lot of type of games. You're telling me you put Season of the Sakura at the same level as Beat 'em and Eat 'em? His favorite artist, book, and writer were MC Hammer. Honestly, low-key a great choice. And like Roy Burns putting on the hockey mask, Ivan decides to continue the legacy of Mario is Missing. Of course, he faces issues almost immediately. When PlayShape said that he was done with the community, he was really done with the community, and he no longer had the source code for the original game. So Ivan took it upon himself to just rebuild it from scratch. And he clearly had an extreme passion for the work that he was doing. He was a self-described introverted nerd and the perfect type of person to do this. He was already coding at his real job, but he found that work unsatisfying. And Ivan had been a Mario fanatic since the original game. So when PlayShapes gave the game up to the Legend of Crystal forums, he knew that he had to step up to the plate. He had to be the one to continue this game. Oh man, it was enough to spark me a huge interest in making the game. The simple fact, a ditzy princess started the level entirely naked, then dressing herself with her pink dress without panty, then opening her dungeon-like door in order to get good morning from the Chancellor from Super Mario RPG, which was indeed a blowjob, making the Toads surprised, and then seeing this blonde bimbo into lewd scenes with Goombas. Later on, got me attention. Wow, this game is very cute. Ivan meditated on this new adventure and decided that he was ready to make a full Mario is Missing game, with the aim of having 8 worlds. Just like a lot of classic games, including the OG Marios, and actually being a more substantial game than the actual Mario is Missing. He was prepared to spend all of his waking hours on this game. But like a lot of fledgling game developers, Ivan found out that he may have bitten off more than he could chew. Figuring out how to code this game began to overwhelm him, and that's when a team began to form. Tripflip would join the team as one of its artists. Ivan Adler could do a lot of things and was coding seemingly every day, even teaching himself other necessary languages as he went along, but he was no artist.
You're no artist, you suck!
If you thought Mario Wonder did something different with the art style, look at this Mario game's art direction. At least, you know, what I can show you of it. From 2012 to 2020, Ivan was coding this game like a madman. This was a labor-intensive passion project. Legends of Crystal's thread on this was over 800 pages with countless updates from the team. This guy was extremely attentive, listening to people's bug complaints as well as game suggestions. Hey, there's a bug with the timer when you fuck a blooper. Can you fix the bug where coming reduces Peach's breast size? You can discuss what sex Birdo will be. You can vote on the shape of Peach's peach. This game had more transparency than the government. Your voice was going to be critical when it came to deciding what Morton Bowser's phallus looked like. Here's how I think a boss's cock size should really be. P.S. I reproducted it as a black cock to make it look better with the rosy red than the gray tones. Small details paid attention to with love and care. You always knew that Ivan was hard at work, and by the next update there'd be significant progress on Peach's breast size and checking of anal scenes with Goombas and Shy Guys. Instead of just getting bigger when you get a mushroom, Peach will now acquire clothing along with growing bigger breasts, although she's currently in a frog suit. Because when she's in the frog suit, the breast size doesn't make a difference. There were even roadmaps for future updates, like it was a modern-day AAA title. So with all this hard work being put in by Ivan and his team, what were people actually going to play? Yeah, the game was going to be a side-scroller like the original Mario games, but what about the plot? Princess Peach has been a pubescent damsel in her kingdom. Aside of having to rule the Toad's land, she was discovering herself, as she is now an adult. She's getting more and more aroused, while discovering things like the ability to keep some things hidden there, her back hammer space. She had urges we may not know until then. Maybe she loves to tease her ass with the dildo at every morning. Is she getting fed by the Toads? Mario is always saving her without knowing those details. After so many quests, finally Princess Peach has been in love with Mario. She was a bit embarrassed, but now she decides to make love to him after so many adventures. Peach and Mario went on a romantic date inside the XS Express, and were enjoying the company of each other. Then, they had a kiss, and more, you decide. Then they returned to Peach's castle. Peach, now drunk, began to undress herself and lay in bed, while suddenly, airships passed by. Mario saw this and left without saying a word. Peach, somewhat confused and slightly irritated, yelled, "Mario, well, he probably comes back soon." But he did not come back, and Peach fell asleep. Meanwhile, Kamek throws a gas over the inhabitants, making most of them horny. So they can't organize a counterattack.
while embarrassing Peach. Peach, still a virgin, innocent and ditzy as never before, must now search and find Mario while defeating his enemies. Will she be able to make it to him, still a virgin? Or will she give up to all lascivity? And as you may have guessed from that plot summary, there's multiple paths you can follow here. You have kind of like a pacifist kind of run, except, you know, instead of not killing people, you just don't fuck. You have the virgin route all the way up to the horror route, which is what happens when you just decide to screw around with Goombas and whatnot. Each update to the game inspired a community-wide goon sesh, which would always come with new ideas, like they wanted more from the story. If Peach is a virgin, she should be embarrassed the first time she's deflowered and then grown into a nymphomaniac. Which, I mean, come on, this wasn't Peach's idea. This is all Kamek's doing. As Ivan posted, Mario only jerked on her. You know boyfriends can do that with shy girlfriends anyway. She remains a virgin. Gameplay-wise, it's like a flash browser version of Mario 2 with the influence of Mario 3, including the world map. Depending on how you play, it could either be a standard Mario game or a sex simulator, with added replayability with new costumes, playable princesses, and pathways. While the game played like a Mario platformer though, the team kind of wanted more out of it. So they added a horny meter bar, which makes me think of activating your special like in WCW Revenge. Peach will only come if 100% excited. See, it's classic WCW 2000 style writing. There are also discussions of mechanics like defeat rape. You know, would that be the equivalent of dying? Would it lock you out of a 100% run? For about a year, this game was being continuously updated. Like, this was no typical fan game. They were just constantly getting new levels, scenes, outfits. When Bowsette became a meme, Ivan incorporated her into the game. Oh, you may have already beaten the game, but now you gotta play it again to see the Luigi Glory Hole cutscene. You know, it's kinda crazy how consistently Ivan and his team were delivering more than what people would consider to be legitimate game developers. But now, in all his time working on this game, and all his time teaching himself as he goes, he's developing legitimate game development skills. And he says that he wants to use these skills to develop new erotic games. But still, he swore that Peach's Untold Stories would continue to get new updates. At this point, he had spent about 8 years on the game, and it's not like he was making a living off of this. He had a Patreon for it, but it wasn't doing crazy numbers. He still had a day job, and he didn't intend to leave that day job. All these animated scenes of different ways that Peach could get impregnated, this was all just a labor of love. Peach's wasn't his only game. At one point, he was developing a game called Legend of Crystal AE, which looks like any Sonic porn ever. The team also had another fan game that was called Wonderful Sonia, an original IP. So yeah, Ivan had some other irons on the fire. Ivan's only problem, all these skills he learned in Adobe Flash may be going extinct, because Flash was about to become phased out. But he would soon have bigger problems than the fate of Flash. September 2020, articles would come out about the existence of Peach's Untold Story, and that's when it got the attention of Nintendo. Shortly after the media coverage, he would receive a DMCA from Nintendo. 8 years of work down the drain.
Nintendo inspired me to make something! Yeah!
This is what I do. I sue your ass and your balls!
After this happened, Ivan would be interviewed by Dojins.com. I feel somewhat powerless. I did it all for free, just because I love to do it. He was mad that of all the fan games and whatnot that exist out there, they chose to pick on him. He also believed that this would fall under fair use. And if something didn't, he would like to just simply scrub it from the game. And on New Year's Eve of 2020, there was an update. 2020 was the worst year of my life. There were job woes and nobody was getting back to him about defending his game's right to exist. And in Adler's mind, this was a work that only benefited Nintendo. I really don't know what to do but to ask whether we really have any freedom to fantasize about a given character we love. Nintendo would argue that this work isn't transformative. They had shareholders to look after and didn't want anyone corrupting their characters. A familiar sentiment if you watched my Super Hornio Brothers video. This game was using a lot of their registered IPs. There was even posts where the game was linked to official Mario sound effects. The game got too much media attention, and now any page hosting it was getting a DMCA. Nintendo would even take the game's coding down from GitHub. Ivan believed though that his game would be so well regarded that it would establish a new category of Mario game. In his words, this wasn't going to be just another parody game. He was holding out hope that by simply stating that this game was for mature audiences over 18, that Nintendo would reconsider the DMCA. You know, this wasn't a run-of-the-mill hentai game that is 5-minute fap then the end. The demo Ivan played of Mario is Missing 2 by Playshapes left him feeling that so much more could have been done to make it a more immersive experience. Ivan's dream was of making a huge game that would require a ton of coding, and was going to source characters from as many Mario games as he could, kind of like a Smash Bros. Of porn. But Nintendo pointed to a precedent set by a Disney lawsuit from the 70s where someone made a pornographic Mickey Mouse comic. Part of why Ivan was so flabbergasted by all this was that he thought Nintendo was just okay with fan games, because he saw so many of them around that weren't being bothered.
You've got your head up your butt.
Even the game itself was a remake of another fan game. And then of course you get all the classic ROM hacks too, like who could forget Naked Mario Brothers and Homo Cop. Of course, as you guys probably know, Nintendo is probably the most infamous company when it comes to going after fan works. Full Screen Mario, 3D Zelda, Zelda Maker, Pokénet, fan sites. Nintendo's gone after them all. I guess should have made an adult Bubsy game instead. I haven't eventually managed to get in contact with some people who would help him fight the lawsuit, but even still, it's a tough battle to fight. He posted that the future of his game had 3 options. You can modify the game until it meets the qualifications of a transformative work. That's kind of what happened with Graal when it was previously Zelda Online. You can take the game, as he put it, inside the house, where he just has the game privately in his home and he can invite friends over to play it. Or he can just abandon the game completely. He even suggested that maybe if he did that, others would take up after him, just as he had did 8 years prior. His ideal choice was the first one, where you could just modify the game enough that it would be okay. And when Dojins.com asked him how the DMCA will affect his Patreon, he said, "I don't know, and I don't care. That's because I make games for free. For example, while other developers with smaller games than mine were getting $2,000 or more as donations, I was getting $150 average. I consider tips, even a .0001 as a thank you. You are special, rather than, I know you need money. And this makes me remember to say, if you're a developer, please don't just expect money, even from small donations. Create it with love. By standing up in the morning, thank your God for the day, have a nice jog or another exercise, then find the time to create. Do it as a hobby. Preserve your main job. If you get really famous and you can be supported, you can leave your job, but keep creating like you're loving someone. Do it with your heart, like a special painting. The more you work by using your heart, the more special and immortal it will become, even using outdated code and graphics." In the time following all this, Ivan went completely dark. Even people he had been collaborating with couldn't get a hold of him, and some began to get concerned for his well-being, especially considering that he had once said that he would rather die than abandon this game. But then after a couple of years without a peep, he would re-emerge in 2022, explaining that he'd been dealing with depression and the DMCA kinda scared him off the internet. More than anything though, despite the disappointing end, it seemed like he was mostly just happy that anyone cared about his game at all. And even to this day, you can see brand new posts of people talking about what this game meant to them. In fact, I even saw some people suggesting that maybe they'll pick up where Ivan left off, but it still remains to be seen what will become of that. Anyway, that's all for now. If you like this video, turn on notifications and check out my video about Barkley's Shut Up and Jam Gaiden 2. I'm out.